Good morning. Project for today is to put a skid plate on the KLX300R. I kind of put this off for a while. I'm still not, the kind of writing I do, I'm not sure that I need a skid plate, but what the hell. The stock skid plate on this actually isn't too bad, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here in a minute. And we'll look at some things to consider if you're going to put a skid plate on this bike. I know that some people have mounted skid plates. I don't know the brand names. To me, they look like Chinese knockoffs, but I think they may have used bolts that were slightly too long and they protruded too far up the nuts that are welded on, the bracket, the OEM bracket that's on there for the stock skid plate. And so when the skid plate was pushed up by an impact with a log or a rock or whatever, it pushed those bolts up through the crankcase. So that's probably the number one consideration when putting a skid plate on a KLX300R or KLX300. I believe they're all the same on the bottom. So no matter which skid plate you use, make sure the bolts aren't sticking too far through the nuts that are welded to the back side of the bracket. Because if you do encounter a rock or a log and you bend the skid plate, it's going to push that bolt up into your engine crankcase. And in some cases, it pokes a hole in the engine crankcase. That's where I've said a couple of times that no skid plates better than half these aftermarket skid plates on this particular bike because of that reason. Let's look under the bike and I'll show you, let's look under the bike and I will show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's the stock skid plate. You can see it's fairly reasonable as far as thickness. It's a little more than an 1/8 inch, I believe. It's probably some pretty good grade of aluminum since it's coming from the factory. It attaches here and back here. The two bolts I'm talking about that you want to make sure are not too long are the two that are going to go right here. You can see there's not a lot of room right here. So if the bolt is sticking through that nut at all, and you have an impact here, it could push through the crankcase here. And there's pictures of that happening on the internet. So, be careful with that. The other thing with adding some of these skid plates, I'm not going to mention any names, but they're not from this country, the US. They do not engage the frame at all. They're kind of they're narrow like this right in this area. So, but yet they hang down. So when material hangs down, it's more likely to encounter, an object that's going to hit, push here because it has spacers because they want you to remove this. I really wish someone would build a skid plate that leaves this one intact and just goes on top of it and engages the frame out here. I mean, it might be a little extra weight, but holy cow, you would be almost bulletproof underneath in that scenario. Anyway, some of the aftermarket skid plates do not engage the frame out here for strength. So they literally will push up right here and put all the stress on this bar, which really isn't a bar. It's a pressed piece of metal shaped like a U, like this. It's welded across here with nuts welded here and here for these bolts to engage. So it's not that thick. This can bend, especially when this isn't connected to it. This is providing a lot of strength to this C-channel. When you remove this, then just the C-channel, now it's, you're gonna have some weakened structure there. So some of these thinner skid plates right through here that don't engage this for some support, they put bolts through with spacers. So that allows, well, it doesn't allow, it shouldn't allow, that causes the skid plate to hang down lower, which is more likely to, like I said earlier, hit a rock or a log or something and apply pressure to that C-channel and push everything into the engine. So having said all that, I've decided on the Ricochet. The only thing I don't like about the Ricochet is the fact that the bolts aren't flush on the bottom. Probably not going to be an issue for me. Like I said, I wasn't even sure that I needed a skid plate. And if I make it through this riding season and there's not a scratch on the bottom of this, that's kind of proof of that. But I occasionally go on single track stuff with rocks, so it's possible. And when I put these bolts in, I'm going to make sure they don't stick too far through that C channel. And if they do, I'm going to source some shorter bolts and just use Loctite on them. So anyway, let's take off the OEM skid plate and see what we have. So just looking at this, I can basically tell already that the bolts supplied with the Ricochet here are too long. This is the ideal situation here, what Kawasaki's done. You don't want your bolt to protrude any farther than that up into that bracket. And I didn't measure it, but you can look at this and tell that it's at least 1/4 inch too long. So I'm going to try the shorter bolts, or I might even have some bolts I can use, but I'd rather use these Torx head. In case they get beat up, they should be easy to remove. But I'm going to go ahead and place this up there and screw this in and see just how far it goes through. I don't want it protruding through the nut on the bracket, because that decreases the clearance between the bracket and the engine cases, which is exactly what we don't want. Okay, so you can really see what I'm talking about now. I went ahead and torqued those up a little bit. But you see how much that's sticking through? Ideally, 1 thread sticking through at the most. So yeah, I'm going to trim those down with a Dremel tool so that they're basically flush with those nuts. That way my air gap above the bolt, between the crankcase and the bolt, is a little better. Okay, we're back. Everything's Loctited and torqued. As you can see, there's a thread and a half sticking through, so clearance between that bracket and my engine is probably about as good as it's going to get. And it utilizes the OEM rear mounting points, the OEM front mounting points, and then these pipe clamps. There's one up there, one just like that on the other side to secure the top. That's about it. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward install. It appears that it'll do the job. We'll see. Thanks for watching. Okay, so you can really see what I'm talking about now. I went ahead and torqued those up a little bit. But you see how much that's sticking through? Ideally, 1 thread sticking through at the most. So yeah, I'm going to trim those down with a Dremel tool so that they're basically flush with those nuts. That way my air gap above the bolt, between the crankcase and the bolt, is a little better. Okay, we're back. Everything's Loctited and torqued. As you can see, there's a thread and a half sticking through, so clearance between that bracket and my engine is probably about as good as it's going to get. And it utilizes the OEM rear mounting points, the OEM front mounting points, and then these pipe clamps. There's one up there, one just like that on the other side to secure the top. That's about it. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward install. It appears that it'll do the job. We'll see. Thanks for watching.